When the billionaire heard the janitor playing the piano, he froze, hearing that music, the very same melody his wife used to play before she vanished 20 years ago. Dmitry Sokolov, the most successful and influential figure in real estate, had spent years immersed in luxury and relentless work. His mansion, luxury hotels, and countless projects became his sanctuary, but nothing could fill the void in his heart since the moment his wife, Elena, disappeared without a trace 20 years ago. The nights once filled with warmth and love turned into hours of loneliness, haunted by bitter memories and the eternal question, what happened to Elena? It was a rainy evening when Dmitry decided to inspect one of his most luxurious hotels, the Imperial Garden. It had become routine for him to personally oversee everything, as if by doing so he could keep his life under control after Elena's disappearance. The hotel sparkled with pristine cleanliness, as always. But this time, something disrupted the usual calm. As Dmitry walked down the marble corridor, a melody echoed in the background. He froze. It was impossible, yet those notes felt painfully familiar. There was no mistaking it. He knew this melody. It was the song Elena used to play on the piano, a piece she had composed herself, known to no one else. His heart pounded wildly, and a lump formed in his throat. He couldn't believe his ears, but he knew he wasn't mistaken. Thank you for listening to our stories. Don't forget to subscribe and give us a like. Now let's continue. Determined to find answers, Dmitry followed the sound, which seemed to come from the service area. His footsteps echoed in the quiet hotel as he moved down the corridor leading to the kitchen. There, in a forgotten corner, he saw an old, dusty grand piano, still functional. Behind it sat a woman he knew well, though he had never seen her in this role, Natalia, the janitor. She was playing the melody as if it were a part of her very being. Dmitry stood still, unable to process what he was seeing. How could an ordinary janitor know this melody, a song so special to him and Elena? His mind raced with questions, and a growing unease stirred in his chest. Where did you learn to play that melody? Dmitry finally asked, his voice quiet but laced with the pain he had long suppressed. Natalia flinched and stopped playing, turning to face him. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she realized she'd been caught. I'm sorry, Mr. Sokolov, she replied, lowering her gaze. I didn't know I wasn't allowed to play here. It's just this melody reminds me of my childhood. Dmitry, his throat dry, took a step forward. Where do you know it from? He pressed, staring at her intently, unable to hide his shock. Natalia, visibly nervous, shrugged. My mother used to play it when I was little, but I don't remember much about her, sir. This song, it always makes me feel her presence, even though I haven't known where my family is for a long time. Dmitry's heart tightened. How is this possible? How could an ordinary janitor know a song only his wife had played? Was it a coincidence, or was something more? Dmitry, a man who always maintained control, felt this melody tearing down the walls he had built over the past 20 years. Tell me, Natalia, he said, now with more confidence. What else do you remember about your mother? Natalia hesitated, as if reluctant to reveal too much. Not much, Mr. Sokolov. I was left at an orphanage when I was a child. I don't have many memories of her, just this song. Those words hit Dmitry like a ton of bricks. The song, the orphanage, a past shrouded in mystery. Something about Natalia's story felt like more than a coincidence. A long-forgotten need to find answers stirred in his soul. Sensing the awkward silence, Natalia stood from the piano and began to apologize. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you, she said. It's not that, Dmitry interrupted, his mind racing. I need to know more about your past. Are you willing to tell me everything? Natalia looked at him, clearly surprised by her boss's sudden interest in her personal life. But something in his gaze made her nod. If you want, Mr. Sokolov, of course. Dmitry didn't know what answers he would find, But he knew one thing. This melody had unearthed pain he thought was long buried. And somehow, Natalia was the key to understanding what had happened 20 years ago. That night, Dmitry couldn't sleep. The melody Natalia played echoed in his mind, as if awakening something he believed was long gone. He rose early the next morning, unable to find comfort in the darkness of his bedroom. He knew he couldn't ignore what had happened at the hotel. It was too strange a coincidence to dismiss. He headed straight to his office, a grand room in his mansion adorned with business books and photos of his professional achievements. But among all these symbols of success, one photograph stood out, reminding him that his life, no matter how perfect it appeared, was incomplete. It was a picture of Elena, smiling happily, taken just days before her disappearance. Sitting in his leather chair, Dmitry picked up the photo. "Elena, is this melody somehow leading me to you?" he thought, tracing his fingers along the frame with longing. He felt he had to act, and act quickly. A few hours later, he returned to the hotel. Dmitry wanted to speak with Natalia again, but this time without the initial shock. He planned to dig deeper into her story. Entering the service area, he saw Natalia mopping the floors in one of the corridors. With restraint but a hint of excitement, he approached her. "Natalia," he called, his tone softer than before. "Do you have time to talk?" Natalia flinched, not expecting to see the hotel's owner again, especially with such a question. But she wiped her hands on her apron and turned to him. "Of course, Mr. Sokolov," she replied, slightly nervous. "What do you want to talk about?" Dmitry gestured for her to follow him to a more private area, away from the other staff and the hustle of the hotel. Once they were seated, Dmitry wasted no time. "Yesterday, I couldn't stop thinking about the melody you played. I want to know more about your mother, about your childhood. You said you were left at an orphanage. Is that true?" Natalia nodded slowly, her gaze tense. "Yes," she said. "I was very young when my mother left me at the orphanage. I don't remember her well. The only thing I have left of her is that song she used to play before everything changed." The phrase "before everything changed" sent a chill down Dmitry's spine. Those were words he himself had used countless times when thinking about the day Elena disappeared, the day his world changed forever. "Do you remember anything else?" Dmitry asked, now even more intrigued. "Maybe images, words?" Natalia frowned, trying to focus on fragments of memories. "I remember a place. I think it was a park with lots of trees. And there was a woman. I don't know if it was my mother, but I could never recall her face. It's like it's always in the shadows," she said, struggling to piece together her past. Dmitry felt they were getting closer to something important, but Natalia's memories were too vague. He knew he couldn't force her to remember more, especially if she didn't realize the significance her words might hold. "Natalia," Dmitry said carefully, choosing his words, "have you ever tried to investigate your past, to find out who your mother was and why she left you at the orphanage?" Natalia shook her head, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "No, Mr. Sokolov," she said. "For me, the past has always been something I prefer to leave behind. My life hasn't been easy, but I've gotten used to not expecting answers from something so far away." Dmitry, accustomed to controlling everything, felt frustration rising. He wanted answers, but Natalia seemed resigned to her past remaining a mystery. Yet something about her story continued to nag at him. He was certain she knew more than she realized, and perhaps she was afraid to seek the truth. "If you don't mind," Dmitry said after a brief pause, "I'd like to help you. I can hire someone to investigate. It doesn't make sense that someone who doesn't remember their mother knows such a specific melody. There has to be more to this, and I think it's important to find out." Natalia looked at him in surprise. She wasn't used to anyone, let alone someone as powerful as Dmitry, taking an interest in her life. Her instincts told her to leave things as they were, but there was a seriousness in Dmitry's voice she couldn't ignore. "Mr. Sokolov, I'm not sure this is necessary. I've learned to live with what I know. But if you think it's worth looking into, I suppose I have nothing to lose." Dmitry nodded, making a firm decision. "I'll hire a detective. All I need is your permission to start the search." Still bewildered by the situation, Natalia slowly nodded in agreement. Without hesitation, Dmitry made a quick call to arrange everything necessary. He knew he couldn't let time steal his chance to uncover the truth. "Thank you, Natalia," he said gently. "I'm sure we'll learn more about your past soon." Natalia didn't fully understand why Dmitry was so invested, but deep down, she felt this investigation might lead to answers she hadn't expected. Dmitry, on the other hand, knew he was on the verge of something big. He had a feeling he was about to unravel a mystery that could change his life forever. Days passed, filled with a strange sense of anticipation. Dmitry, usually calculated and cold, now felt fate was playing a game with him, dealing cards he couldn't ignore. The detective he hired began digging, and Dmitry couldn't stop thinking about the possibility that this young woman was more than a coincidence in his life. Her memories, the fragments of her childhood, and, of course, that song all pointed to something much deeper. He instructed the detective to be as discreet as possible. Dmitry didn't want to alarm Natalia or, worse, create a stir without concrete evidence. He was methodical, never acting on guesses, but this time it wasn't logic and facts guiding his decisions. It was something deeply intuitive. Meanwhile, Natalia continued her routine at the hotel, unaware that her past was being uncovered. One morning, as Dmitry reviewed financial reports in his office, his phone rang. It was the detective. "Mr. Sokolov, we've made progress in Natalia's case," the voice on the other end said. Dmitry felt a knot form in his stomach. He pushed the documents aside and leaned toward the desk, as if the motion could bring him closer to the answers he craved. "What did you find?" he asked, his tone leaving no room for delay. Natalia was indeed left at an orphanage around the age of 5. There are almost no official records of her family. All we have is the statement of the person who found her, a social worker who brought her to the orphanage after she was discovered near a hospital on the city's outskirts. She was alone, with no documents. Dmitry felt frustration building inside him. He knew the orphanage system back then was far from perfect, but he had hoped for more details, something more concrete. "Is there anything else?" he pressed, hungry for new information. "Yes, sir. There's an interesting detail. According to hospital records, a few days before Natalia was found, a woman was admitted to the emergency room with severe complications. There's not much information about her, but the odd thing is her name was never recorded. She was admitted, but shortly after, she disappeared." A chill ran through Dmitry as he heard this. It was starting to come together, and he didn't like where it was leading. A mysterious woman who vanished from the hospital, a child found shortly afterward. It could be a coincidence, but his intuition told him otherwise. "Can you find out more about this woman?" Dmitry asked, trying to control the rising excitement in his voice. "I'll try, but the hospital where this happened closed long ago. I'll attempt to contact staff who worked there at the time. Maybe someone remembers something. But one thing is clear, Natalia's case is connected to this woman." Dmitry hung up, lost in thought. The puzzle was starting to take shape, but pieces were still missing. A heavy silence filled his office, thick with contemplation. He stood and walked to the window, gazing at the city skyline, his empire. How could so much time have passed without him knowing the truth? How had he missed the signs? Deciding he couldn't wait any longer, Dmitry realized he needed to get closer to Natalia. He had to talk to her, not just as her boss, but as someone who shared a similar pain. He wasn't ready to tell her everything yet, but he needed to continue earning her trust. That evening, Dmitry returned to the hotel, finding an excuse to meet with Natalia. He found her cleaning one of the luxurious suites. The contrast between her modest figure and the grandeur of the room struck him. How could her life have turned out this way? How could the possible heir to his legacy be in such a position? Natalia, he called softly, careful not to startle her. I need to talk to you, if you have a moment. Natalia turned, surprised by his presence, but setting her work aside to listen. Of course, Mr. Sokolov. What did you want to talk about? Dmitry took a deep breath, trying to hide the storm of emotions raging inside him. It wasn't his style to show vulnerability, but something compelled him to open up. I've been thinking a lot about what you told me about your childhood. I want to help you. I've already hired a detective to learn more about your parents. I think you deserve to know where you came from. We all do. Natalia paused, processing his words. She couldn't understand why Dmitry was so invested in her past, but there was sincerity in his voice. I don't know what to say, sir, she finally said, her voice trembling. I never thought anyone, especially you, would care enough to do something like this for me. But I'm not sure I'm ready for what might come up. Dmitry looked at her with understanding and compassion. He knew what it was like to live in the shadow of unanswered questions. He had spent 2 decades in that state. I understand, Natalia. And if at any point it feels like too much, don't worry. I just want you to know I'm here to help, no matter what happens. Natalia nodded, deeply touched by his care. For the first time in a long while, she felt she might not be alone in her struggle to understand her origins. Dmitry said goodbye, leaving her with her thoughts. As he left the hotel, one question haunted him. What will happen when the truth is revealed? Days passed, filled with anticipation. Despite Dmitry's habit of ensuring everything in his life went according to plan, this time he felt powerless. Everything depended on the investigation, which he couldn't speed up. His thoughts were consumed by Natalia and her past, and every night he heard that melody in his head again, each note resonating in his soul like a ghost of long-forgotten pain. One morning, as he sat in his office, his phone rang again. It was the detective. Mr. Sokolov, I have news for you. The detective began, his voice calm but tense. Dmitry immediately set his papers aside and focused on the call. What did you find? He asked, his voice steady but his emotions in turmoil. We managed to locate a former hospital employee who remembers the case because it was so unusual. According to him, the woman was admitted in critical condition, as if she had been held against her will for months. She never gave her name, and despite attempts to treat her, she vanished mysteriously shortly after being admitted. A chill ran through Dmitry. A woman who disappeared without a trace, a child found days later. It was too plausible to be a coincidence. His thoughts swirled. Could this woman be Elena? Are there any records of what happened to her? Dmitry asked, struggling to maintain his composure. Not exactly, the detective replied. But here's the key detail. The woman gave birth in the hospital. The delivery was complicated, but the child survived. For reasons unclear, the child was abandoned after the birth, and that's where we find the connection to Natalia. Dmitry leaned back against his desk, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. Natalia was born in that hospital. It was almost certain. But what terrified him most was that the connection between this woman and his wife, Elena, was becoming increasingly clear. Can we be sure this woman was Elena? Dmitry asked, knowing his heart already had the answer. The detective hesitated before responding. Mr. Sokolov, we can't say with 100% certainty, but there are too many coincidences. The timing, the location, the woman's condition, it all points to her being your wife. If that's the case, Natalia isn't just an abandoned child. She's your daughter. Those words hit Dmitry with tremendous force. He had always imagined that if he ever found Elena, he would find her alone. But now, It seemed his world was about to change in ways he hadn't anticipated. Natalia, the humble janitor with whom he'd had only a few formal conversations, could be his daughter. He sank slowly into his chair, feeling his world crumble. All this time, he had lived unaware that he had a daughter, consumed by thoughts of his lost wife while his own child grew up nearby, unaware of her origins. "I need proof," he whispered, barely audible. "I can't just assume. If Natalia is really my daughter, I need to know for sure." "Of course, sir," the detective replied. "We can arrange a DNA test to confirm it. I can handle everything discreetly if you'd like." Dmitry nodded. It was the only way. A DNA test was his only hope of knowing the truth. "Do it," he said finally, trying to regain his usual cold calculation. "Do whatever it takes." He hung up and sat alone with his thoughts. Dmitry knew he would have to talk to Natalia, but he couldn't reveal everything yet, not until he had proof. However, every day spent near her made it harder to keep the truth at bay. The rest of the week passed in a thick fog of nervous anticipation. Dmitry, always calm and composed in business matters, was now visibly tense. Natalia noticed the change in his behavior, but didn't dare ask why. Their interactions became stranger than ever, yet she maintained her distance. A few days later, the detective called again. "Mr. Sokolov," the voice on the line was serious. "We have the DNA test results." Dmitry took a deep breath, bracing his heart for the answer. "And what do they show?" he asked, his voice trembling with tension. "The test is positive, sir. Natalia is your daughter." Dmitry froze for a moment. He closed his eyes, trying to process what he had just heard. Natalia, his daughter, the child he never knew existed, the girl who grew up alone, unaware of her parents. All this time, Elena had suffered far more than he could have imagined, and now this truth stood before him, unrelenting and devastating. "Thank you," he whispered into the phone, his voice broken. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect her." Dmitry hung up and sat in complete silence. He had a daughter, and now it was his duty to care for her, protect her, and perhaps try to rebuild a connection he never knew existed. But one question tormented him. How do I tell Natalia the truth? Dmitry couldn't stop thinking about what he had just learned. Natalia was his daughter. He had spent so many years unaware of her existence, and now he faced the daunting task of revealing the truth to her. He knew it wouldn't be easy. How could he tell her without overwhelming her? How could he avoid scaring her or dumping everything on her at once? These questions tore him apart from within. He tried to stay calm, as he always did in business, but the stakes here were far higher than money. This was about his life, his family. 4 days, Dmitry avoided direct contact with Natalia as he grappled with the revelation. A battle raged in his soul, fear of her reaction, a desire to protect her, and the endless pain of knowing he hadn't been able to save her or her mother in the past. One evening, as the sun set, Dmitry finally made a decision. He couldn't delay any longer. It was becoming too difficult. He needed to talk to Natalia. She deserved the truth, and he could no longer hide it. That evening, wandering through the hotel, he saw Natalia cleaning one of the event halls. Her calm and modest demeanor now held a completely different meaning in his eyes. This wasn't just a young woman working in his hotel. She was his daughter, and she had no idea their lives were intertwined. "Natalia," he called softly. She turned and smiled, though her eyes held a hint of surprise. She had noticed Dmitry avoiding her in recent days and couldn't understand why. "Mr. Sokolov, how can I help you?" she asked. Dmitry sighed, realizing this was a pivotal moment. He had to do this now. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice tense but resolute. "Can you come with me to my office? This isn't the best place." Natalia frowned slightly, sensing something unusual in his request, but she nodded and followed him. They walked through the hotel's long corridors in silence, and when they entered Dmitry's office, he closed the door behind them. "Please, have a seat," he offered, gesturing to a chair in front of his desk. Natalia sat, visibly nervous about what was happening. She couldn't understand why Dmitry was so serious. He sat across from her, clasping his hands together, and for a moment he remained silent, searching for the right words. "Natalia," he began, his voice soft but filled with emotion, "there's something you need to know. I've been investigating your past for a while now." Natalia looked at him in surprise. "Yes, you mentioned hiring a detective," she replied. "Yes, I hired a detective to find out who your parents were and what happened to you as a child. What I've discovered could change everything." Natalia sat still, her eyes locked on Dmitry, trying to process his words. Her heart began to race. "What did you find out?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling. Dmitry took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. "I found out that your mother was Elena, my wife," he said, his voice shaking as he spoke the words. "Natalia, you're my daughter." The room fell silent. Natalia sat motionless, unable to immediately comprehend what she had heard. She seemed to turn to stone, staring at Dmitry. Her eyes filled with confusion. "Your daughter?" she breathed, shaking her head as if she couldn't believe what he was saying. "That's impossible. I don't believe it." Dmitry nodded, understanding her shock. "I know it's hard to accept," he said softly, "but I had a DNA test done, and it confirmed it. You're my daughter, Natalia. Your mother, Elena, was kidnapped 20 years ago, and all this time, I didn't know I had a daughter. I didn't know she was pregnant when she was taken." Natalia covered her face with her hands, her breathing uneven. She couldn't believe that everything she thought she knew about her life was a lie. "How is this possible?" she whispered, shaking her head. "How could I live my whole life not knowing who my parents were? And now that I know the truth, it's too much." Dmitry stood and approached her, his heart breaking at the sight of her distress. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Natalia," he said softly, "I know this is hard, but I would never lie to you. I wouldn't have told you this if I wasn't certain. I understand what you're feeling right now, and I don't expect you to accept it immediately. But I'm here to help you. I want you to know I never stopped searching for your mother. And if I had known I had a daughter, I would have searched for you too." Natalia looked up, tears in her eyes. She still couldn't fully process what she had heard. "I need time," she whispered. "I don't know what to do with this information." Dmitry nodded, understanding that she couldn't immediately accept such a shocking truth. "You don't have to come to work. Take some time to process this," he said with genuine care. "I won't rush you. Just know that I'm here, and I'll always be here." Natalia stood, her breathing still heavy, but she knew she needed to leave to process everything. Without further words, she left the office, and Dmitry remained standing in the silence, watching the door close behind her. He knew he had done the right thing, but now everything depended on her. Natalia left Dmitry's office, her mind overwhelmed. She didn't know where to go or what to do. Everything she had learned seemed unbelievable. How could she learn in a single day that her life wasn't what it had always seemed? Her world had turned upside down, and she felt like she was losing her footing. Her feet carried her out of the hotel and onto the city streets. She wandered aimlessly, barely noticing her surroundings, lost in thoughts about what Dmitry had told her. My mother, Elena, was kidnapped, and Dmitry is my father. Those words swirled in her mind over and over. Her heart ached with pain and shock. She couldn't believe that everything she knew about her life had been a lie. Lost in her thoughts, Natalia stopped at a park, the same one she sometimes dreamed about, where she thought she had seen her mother. She sat on a bench and closed her eyes, trying to piece together fragments of her memories. It was a park with tall trees and shaded paths. She had always remembered it vaguely, but now it felt more significant. Perhaps these were her last memories of her mother. She covered her face with her hands, trying to hold back the tears threatening to spill over. Her whole life, she had felt something was missing, something vital, but she could never pinpoint what it was. Now that the truth was revealed, it didn't bring relief, it only deepened her sense of loss. Hours passed before Natalia returned to the hotel. She knew she needed to find answers. Back in her room, she decided she had to visit the orphanage where she grew up. Her life, her past, it all felt like a puzzle she was obligated to solve. She couldn't just leave things as they were. The next morning, Natalia went to the orphanage. The place looked much smaller than she remembered, but as soon as she stepped inside, memories flooded back. Her heart tightened as she saw the familiar corridors and playground. She remembered running here with other children, always feeling like an outsider, lost. When she entered, one of the old caregivers, Elena Petrovna, recognized her immediately. "Natalia!" she exclaimed warmly. "It's been so many years. What brings you here?" Natalia gave a strained smile, feeling awkward about the conversation ahead. "I came for answers," she said, her voice trembling, "about my mother and what happened before I ended up here." Elena Petrovna looked at her with concern. She had always known that Natalia, like many other children, carried deep wounds, but her case was particularly mysterious. "Of course, dear," she said, taking Natalia's hand and leading her to a small office. "We have your records, but I'm afraid there's not much. Your story has always been complicated." They went to a room where old archives were kept. Elena Petrovna pulled out a worn folder. "This is everything we have," she said, handing the documents to Natalia. "When you were brought here, you were very young. You were found near a hospital, and no one knew who your mother was." Natalia began flipping through the papers. Among them was a small handwritten note stating that a girl had been found near a hospital, but her mother remained unknown, having disappeared shortly after being admitted to the emergency room. Natalia felt the same chill she had when Dmitry told her about the investigation's findings. "I only remember the melody my mother used to play," Natalia said quietly to Elena Petrovna. "It's the only thing that connected me to her." Elena Petrovna nodded sadly. "Yes, you used to hum that melody when you were little. It reminded you of your mother." Those words made Natalia think even harder. The melody was all she had, but now, knowing Dmitry was her father, the song took on new meaning. "Did you ever hear anything else about my mother?" Natalia asked, a glimmer of hope in her voice. Elena Petrovna shook her head. "I'm afraid not, dear. Your case was unusual, but so many years have passed. All we knew was that you were found near the hospital." Natalia sighed sadly, realizing she wouldn't find more answers here. She thanked Elena Petrovna and left, feeling that her journey to understanding her past was only beginning. Back at the hotel, Natalia knew her life would never be the same. Her past was tangled, but now that she knew the truth, she understood she had to move forward, though she didn't yet know how. When Natalia returned to the hotel, her mind was overwhelmed with thoughts and questions. She felt her previous beliefs crumbling. Although she had learned more about her past than she expected, the new answers only intensified her inner conflict. Now that she knew who her father was and what had happened to her mother, returning to her old life seemed impossible. The next morning, Dmitry waited for Natalia in his office. He knew this meeting was inevitable, and he needed to help her cope with what they had learned. When Natalia entered the room, her face reflected confusion, but also determination. "Good morning, Natalia," Dmitry said quietly, offering her a seat. "How are you?" She sat across from him, taking a deep breath before responding. "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "This is all so sudden and overwhelming. I went to the orphanage where I grew up. I tried to find more answers, but they have almost no information." The only thing I know for sure is that you're my father. Dmitry nodded, trying not to show how much her words affected him. He understood she needed time to adjust to this reality. I understand, he said, looking at her with care. I don't expect you to accept this right away. But now that we know the truth, I want you to know I'm here for you. I'll always be here, Natalia. Natalia nodded, her gaze fixed on the floor. She seemed vulnerable and lost, but also ready to embrace her new reality. I think it's going to take time, she said quietly, to get used to the fact that my life wasn't what I thought it was. I spent so many years not knowing who my parents were, and now I know, but it doesn't ease the pain. Dmitry felt his heart ache at her words. He knew rebuilding their bond wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to do whatever it took. You're right, he said gently. It won't be easy, and I can't erase all those years. But I want us to start something new. You're not alone, Natalia. We can figure this out together. Natalia looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. Thank you, she whispered. I appreciate that, but I need time to figure out how to live with this knowledge. It all feels so unreal. Dmitry nodded, understanding her feelings. I'll wait as long as it takes, he said, his voice sincere. I want you to feel comfortable in this situation. We can't change the past, but we can build a future. Despite the weight of what had happened, Natalia felt support and genuine care in Dmitry's words. She realized she was no longer alone and that there was someone willing to walk this difficult path with her. Days passed, filled with reflection. Dmitry and Natalia avoided frequent conversations, each immersed in their own thoughts. Dmitry, a businessman accustomed to controlling every situation, now realized for the first time that he couldn't control emotions, neither his own nor Natalia's. All he could do was wait for her to be ready for the next steps. Meanwhile, Natalia began to accept that her life had changed forever. One evening, sitting in her room and looking at photos from her childhood, she decided it was time to move forward. She could no longer live in the past, in the shadows of uncertainty. She had a father, and she needed to give this new life a chance. The next morning, Natalia went to Dmitry's office. She knew it was time to talk to him, to tell him she was ready to accept his help and his role in her life. When she entered, Dmitry looked up from his papers, his eyes lighting up at the sight of her. Natalia, he began, seeing the determination on her face. Is everything okay? She sat across from him and took a deep breath. I've been thinking a lot, she started. All this time, I didn't know how to accept this truth. But now I realize I have a chance to learn about my family. I want to know more about my mother, about your life, about what we can do to move forward. Dmitry couldn't hide the relief he felt. He smiled at her warmly. I'm glad to hear that, Natalia. We can start by spending more time together if you'd like. I can tell you everything I know about your mother and help you learn about our family. Natalia nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of emotions. She had a long journey ahead to fully come to terms with what she had learned, but she felt she was no longer alone. Together with her father, they could start a new chapter in their lives. Weeks passed since the day Natalia and Dmitry first spoke openly about their past. Natalia gradually began to accept that Dmitry was her father and that Elena, whom she never truly knew, was her mother. Each day brought new discoveries that helped Natalia better understand not only her family, but also herself. Dmitry, for his part, did his best to support Natalia, to be the pillar she hadn't had before. They started spending more time together, not as boss and employee, but as father and daughter. Dmitry shared stories about his life before Elena's disappearance, how they met, how they fell in love. He showed her old photos of Elena, smiling happily, playing the piano just as Natalia had imagined. For Natalia, it was a difficult but necessary journey into the past. She understood that despite the lost years, she had to give herself a chance to start anew with Dmitry. Gradually, She began to feel she could trust him. Their meetings became warmer and less tense. One evening, Dmitry decided it was time to talk to Natalia about what had happened to her mother. It was the part of the story he feared revealing fully, but he knew Natalia deserved the truth. As they sat in his office, Dmitry lowered his eyes and took a deep breath. "Natalia, I know it's hard for you to come to terms with everything that's happened," he began, "but I want to tell you the whole truth about what happened to your mother. I've avoided this conversation for a long time because I thought you weren't ready, but you deserve to know what really happened." Natalia listened intently, though she felt a growing unease in her heart. "I'm ready," she said quietly, resting her hands on her knees. "Please tell me." Dmitry paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Elena was kidnapped by a former business partner," he said finally, his voice filled with pain. "His name was Sergei Rudin. We used to work together, but our relationship soured over business. He lost everything, and I always suspected he blamed me for his downfall. I couldn't prove it, but after Elena's disappearance, I was certain he was behind it." Natalia listened in horror. She couldn't believe someone's vengeance could lead to such consequences. "I tried for years to find her," Dmitry continued, his voice trembling. "But Sergei vanished along with her. I didn't know she was pregnant when it happened. Only now, after all these years, did I learn that Elena gave birth to you. But her condition was so severe that she died shortly after." Natalia felt her heart constrict with pain. She knew her mother had died, but she hadn't known the horrific details. She couldn't imagine her mother spending the last months of her life in captivity, then dying alone. "Did you find her?" she asked quietly, her voice shaking. Dmitry shook his head. "No," he replied, his voice even quieter. "I tried to find her, but there were no traces. It's possible Sergei kept her hidden until the end and then got rid of all evidence." Natalia was stunned. Her mother, whom she never knew, had been the victim of a cruel act of revenge. Though she still felt deep grief, her heart filled with anger at the man who had taken her mother and destroyed her parents' lives. "Why wasn't he punished?" she asked, her voice growing firmer. "How could he escape justice?" Dmitry clenched his fists, looking away. "I couldn't find proof," he said with regret. "He disappeared after the kidnapping, and all my attempts to hold him accountable were futile. But I never forgot what he did. And now that you're here, I can't let him get away with it." Natalia looked at Dmitry, her face resolute. "We have to do something," she said firmly. "This man can't go unpunished." Dmitry nodded, agreeing with her. "I've already started," he said. "I've contacted a private investigator, and now we have leads. We'll find him, Natalia. I promise you we'll get the answers you deserve." Despite the horror of what they had learned, Natalia felt that, for the first time in a long time, her father was ready to go to the end to protect her and her mother's memory. The knowledge that they could achieve justice together gave her strength. The following days were filled with tense anticipation. Dmitry and Natalia prepared for a future tied to an investigation that would shed light on the dark pages of their past. But now, they weren't afraid. They were together, and that gave them the strength to move forward. Thank you for listening to the story until the end. Subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends and loved ones. It motivates us to keep working on new stories every day. Don't miss the next amazing story that's about to appear on your screen. We're very grateful to have you with us. See you soon.